What happens when the world's most underestimated nation unleashes the storm everyone thought would never come? When silence turns into shock, and power is no longer defined by alliances or wealth, but by raw courage and unshakable will. This isn't just a story about missiles and maps. It's a story about awakening, about how one nation's defiance shattered decades of dominance, rewrote the rules, and forced even the most powerful leaders on earth to pause and reconsider. In the next few minutes, you will witness the unraveling of global arrogance, the silence of media empires, and the rise of a resistance that refuses to die. This isn't about war. It's about dignity, identity, and the power of standing your ground when the world expects you to fall. Stay with us until the very end. What you're about to hear isn't just a speech. It's a shift in perspective. And once you hear it, you won't see the world the same way again. How global superpowers often approach nations like Iran. For decades, Iran has been subjected to sanctions, threats, and isolation tactics aimed at weakening its infrastructure and forcing submission to Western interests. Yet what many leaders in the West failed to grasp is that a nation's true power is not just in its weaponry or economy, but in its collective will, its cultural memory, and its refusal to bow. Iran has endured war, embargoes, political manipulation, and psychological warfare. Despite all of it, the nation continued to rise, adapt, and most importantly, resist. This resistance is not built on reactionary impulses. It is built on generations of lived experience, sacrifice, and a deeply rooted national identity that prioritizes sovereignty above all. Global analysts underestimated the psychological and ideological strength that comes from being forged in the crucible of adversity. They assumed Iran's people would grow weary, divided, and eventually compliant. But they failed to see how adversity only strengthened the unity of its people and sharpened the strategic patience of its leaders. The world saw Iran's silence as weakness, but that silence was calculation. While Western narratives labeled Iran as volatile, the truth is that Iran was waiting, watching every move, calculating every step, and preparing not for a desperate reaction, but a deliberate response that would make history echo. The underestimation also reflects a deeper issue within the minds of world powers, the arrogance of superiority. When leaders believe they can break the spirit of a nation with drones and sanctions, they reveal more about their own disconnect than they do about their target. Iran's retaliation didn't come from a place of desperation, but from decades of learned patience and strategic evolution. In that moment, the myth that Iran was too weak or too isolated to respond was shattered. Iran did not seek chaos, it sought respect. Its response was a demand to be seen, not as a pawn in someone else's game, but as a player with its own moves. The world powers failed not just militarily, but intellectually and emotionally. They misread the heart of a people, and that miscalculation changed everything. Iran's retaliation that stunned not just its direct adversaries, but the entire international community. When the world anticipated a symbolic or minimal response, Iran delivered a demonstration of military capability and strategic coherence that went far beyond expectations. This was not a scattered show of anger. It was a message carved into the sky with precision-guided technology and careful planning. The operation was conducted with meticulous timing and accurate target selection, revealing that Iran's military apparatus had been preparing for such a moment with high discipline and deep intelligence. It wasn't simply about launching missiles. It was about choosing when and where to strike to maximize strategic impact while minimizing collateral damage, making it clear that this was not about vengeance. It was about deterrence. This retaliation showed that Iran had not only the hardware, but also the command and control structures necessary to launch a synchronized and large-scale counterattack under pressure. The precision of the strikes reflected technical maturity, and the scale revealed a level of operational depth previously underestimated by foreign analysts. Iran sent a clear signal. It can strike with speed, accuracy, and coordination that rivals even the most advanced militaries in the region. The shock was not just in the weapons used, but in how they were used. It challenged long-standing assumptions about Iran's reach and military doctrine, proving that the country is no longer operating purely defensively. It has shifted into a posture of proactive deterrence. What made this event more impactful was how visibly composed and confident Iranian leadership appeared throughout. There was no ambiguity in their response. It wasn't cloaked in deniability. It was clear, firm, and declared to the world. That boldness intensified the global reaction. This was no longer a regional skirmish. It had global implications. Iran displayed an understanding of both physical warfare and psychological warfare. It shattered the perception that military power belongs only to those with Western alliances or billion-dollar defense budgets. Instead, it proved that true power lies in knowing exactly when to act and how to make that act reshape the landscape of regional geopolitics. The retaliation was not just seen, it was felt, politically, militarily, and emotionally. Across global leadership, Iran's unexpected scale of retaliation caused across global political and military centers. For years, world powers, particularly in the West, had constructed a carefully curated belief system around Iran's capabilities. They believed sanctions had crippled its economy to the point of stagnation, that its leadership was internally divided, and that the nation was more bark than bite. When the retaliation came with such sharp timing, coordination, and volume, it sent shockwaves through the very core of decision-making bodies in Washington, Tel Aviv, London, and beyond. Emergency security meetings were called overnight, defense alert levels were raised, and allied nations scrambled to coordinate their response strategies. These were not the actions of confident superpowers. They were the reactions of governments forced to confront a reality they thought they had neutralized. The intelligence community was particularly shaken. Agencies that pride themselves on forecasting global threats were suddenly admitting they had underestimated the scale, timing, and reach of Iran's counteroffensive capability. Satellite images confirmed more damage than expected, while intercepted communications between allies revealed a tone of alarm. The idea that Iran could coordinate such a direct, bold strike and do so openly, with full acknowledgement and justification, defied the calculated risk assessments that had been made prior. Even technologically advanced defense systems like Iron Dome and other allied missile shields were stretched thin, exposing critical vulnerabilities that many thought would only appear in larger, prolonged wars. Diplomatic fronts were no less chaotic. Nations that previously stayed neutral or silent found themselves pressured to take sides. Embassies issued advisories, flight paths were rerouted, the geopolitical temperature rose dramatically, not because Iran had destabilized the region, but because its reaction had exposed how fragile that stability truly was. Iran didn't just strike targets, it struck the heart of overconfidence that had developed within foreign leadership. For the first time in years, these powers had to consider that they were not the sole authors of the script being played out on the global stage. The rules they assumed were unbreakable had been bent and perhaps rewritten within a matter of hours. This disruption forced a recalibration in how nations viewed not only Iran, but the entire power structure of the Middle East and beyond. For by mainstream media outlets to suppress or distort the reality of Iran's retaliation and how that effort ultimately failed in the face of raw, unfiltered truth shared by the public. In the immediate aftermath of Iran's strike, major Western news organizations attempted to downplay the impact by framing it as either symbolic or strategically insignificant. They focused on minor details, selectively reported damage assessments, and highlighted official statements from government spokespeople that minimized the scale of the event. This wasn't accidental. It was a calculated move to manage public perception, to maintain control over the dominant narrative, and to prevent the acknowledgement that a non-Western power had effectively challenged global order without apology or permission. The objective was simple: contain the psychological effect of Iran's strength before it could inspire others or unravel long-held assumptions. However, the digital age has made censorship more difficult than ever. While mainstream platforms stayed silent or evasive, Millions of ordinary people turned to alternative sources. Videos from affected regions began circulating on social media. Satellite imagery, eyewitness testimonies, and real-time reports from independent journalists painted a far more intense picture than what was being shown on television screens. People started asking questions. Why were certain facts missing? Why were timelines inconsistent? Why did it feel like a coordinated attempt to rewrite the truth before it fully emerged? The public began to see the cracks, not just in the coverage of this event, but in the media ecosystem itself. This discrepancy between media reporting and ground reality sparked the quiet rebellion of thought. Citizens who once took news at face value began exploring new voices, listening more closely to regional sources, and questioning long-held narratives about who the aggressors and defenders really were. The media silence, instead of concealing the truth, amplified the hunger for it. It exposed the deeper issue that in global conflict, truth is often the first casualty, not because it is unavailable, but because it is inconvenient to power. Iran's retaliation wasn't just a military action, it was a narrative explosion. It forced people to see that the truth doesn't always wear a suit or sit behind a podium. Sometimes it comes from shaky cell phone footage, desperate voices on the ground, and the raw courage of people willing to show the world what others want hidden. How Iran's retaliation marked a defining shift in the regional balance of influence, shaking the traditional hierarchy that has long favored US-backed coalitions and Western-aligned regimes. For decades, the Middle East has operated under the heavy presence of American military bases, foreign interventions, and a web of political alliances rooted in dependency and fear. Many smaller nations accepted this structure as unchangeable, believing that defying it would lead to isolation or destruction. Iran's bold, unapologetic response shattered that illusion. By responding on its own terms, without permission, and with undeniable impact, Iran demonstrated that regional autonomy was not only possible, it was powerful. The action forced both allies and adversaries to reassess their assumptions. Nations that had previously distanced themselves from Iran out of caution or political alignment suddenly began to reconsider their stances. The show of strength made it clear that Iran was not a passive player, but a central force capable of influencing regional security and diplomacy. Leaders from neighboring countries, even those traditionally aligned with the West, saw firsthand that power was no longer monopolized by the few. Iran had made its case not through negotiation or submission, but through calculated force and strategic timing, and that reality could not be ignored. It reintroduced a multipolar vision for the Middle East, where influence is earned, not assigned. The response also had a psychological impact on the populations of these neighboring countries. People watching from across the region, many of whom have lived under foreign-imposed leadership or suffered from the consequences of external interference, found in Iran's retaliation a new sense of possibility. It wasn't admiration for violence, but a recognition of courage. It sparked the idea that sovereignty can be defended, and that no nation must accept its fate as permanently subordinate to global giants. Iran's actions turned passive observers into thinkers, and thinkers into believers. The balance of fear began to shift. This moment did not mean Iran had become the sole leader of the region, but it meant the old blueprint of control was obsolete. A new chapter began, one written not by those who dominate the airwaves and financial systems, but by those who dare to act with conviction and purpose in the face of overwhelming odds. Iran's retaliation resonated far beyond the battlefield, becoming a message of defiance that echoed across continents and into the hearts of oppressed peoples worldwide. What occurred was more than a geopolitical maneuver. It was a statement of identity, sovereignty, and resilience. For decades, many nations have lived in the shadow of stronger powers, enduring economic domination, military threats, or cultural erasure. These nations, often in the global south, have watched conflict after conflict unfold, where the powerful rewrite the rules and the powerless are expected to obey. Iran's bold act shattered that pattern by proving that resistance, when carried with discipline and courage, can redefine the terms of engagement. Around the world, from Africa to Latin America to parts of Asia, People who have historically faced exploitation and foreign intervention recognize something familiar in Iran's stance. It was not just about missiles, it was about a refusal to kneel. It was the embodiment of a deeper resistance that had existed silently within oppressed communities for generations. That symbolism turned Iran into more than a country reacting to aggression. It became a representation of what it means to stand tall, even when every global system is stacked against you. It showed that resistance isn't always about matching your enemy's strength. It's about using your own strength in a way that disrupts their expectations and asserts your dignity. This transformation from isolated defiance to global inspiration was not orchestrated in diplomatic halls or PR campaigns. It was earned in a moment when action aligned with belief. Iran didn't just retaliate militarily. It sent out a signal to all who have been silenced, starved, or manipulated that there is always a way to rise. That idea cannot be sanctioned or bombed into submission. It lives in the spirit of people who believe their land, their identity, and their truth are worth defending, no matter the cost. In this sense, Iran's retaliation became a spark for a wider awakening. It told the world that resistance has not died, it has evolved. It wears many faces, speaks many languages, and crosses every border where injustice exists. It declared that standing alone does not mean standing weak, and that courage in the face of overwhelming odds can inspire change far beyond the battlefield. What the world witnessed was not just retaliation, it was revelation. Iran's bold response shattered the myth of invincibility held by global powers and ignited a new chapter in geopolitical history. It was a statement that strength lies not in numbers alone, but in the unwavering will to defend dignity, truth, and sovereignty. From media silence to shaken capitals, from exposed alliances to inspired nations, this moment will echo far beyond the missiles and headline. It marked the rise of a resistance that is not only unyielding, but undeniable. Iran did not just respond to an attack, it responded to decades of imposed silence, and the world, for the first time in a long time, had no choice but to listen. To every listener, thank you for walking with us through this powerful reflection. May this speech remind you that courage, truth, and conviction still hold power in a world clouded by fear and manipulation. Stay awake, stay strong, and never underestimate the force of a nation or a soul that refuses to be broken. Good luck on your journey, and thank you for giving your time, your mind, and your heart.